During this project, we are going to be dealing with the art element called space, creating distance or the illusion of depth in an artwork. I have an example that I created. This is just a sample. You get to decide what goes into your picture. I decided that I would draw a knight in shining armor in the middle ground, his castle or his king's castle in the background, and a ferocious dragon in the foreground. These three areas of space, background, middle ground, and foreground, are one of the most important ways that artists show or create the illusion of depth in an artwork. So you're going to decide what to draw, but you must have something in the foreground, something in the middle ground, something in the background. Now, I feel like it's maybe been a while since we discussed these things about space, so let's have a real quick review about foreground, middle ground, background, and also some things that go along with foreground, middle ground, and background that artists use to also help create the illusion of depth or distance, the element of space. The element of space, the final frontier. Not outer space. Sorry. Instead, you are going to be learning how to show distance, that kind of space, on a flat paper, and also how things like size, value, and placement help to show space. There are three areas of space in a picture. There's the area called background. That's like right there in this picture. That, of course, is the area in the back, the part that is far away. There's an area called middle ground. That's like right here in the picture, and that is the area in the middle. And there's the area called foreground right here in the picture, and that, of course, is the part that is up close. Foreground means front. Now, size can help to show space in a picture. Objects in the background are the smallest because they are so far away. Objects in the middle ground are medium-sized because middle means medium, and they are not very close, and neither are they very far away. They're in the middle, so they are medium-sized. And objects in the foreground, that's the front, are the largest because they are right up close to us. Now, value can also help us to show space. Value is how light or dark something is. The air is full of particles, dust, water droplets, bugs, and more. And when we look into the distance, we are looking through all of those particles. They're so small we can't see them, but the greater the distance, the more particles there are. All those particles build up and block our view of things that are far away. So, we can see close objects more clearly because we're looking through fewer particles, and therefore the colors are brighter, darker, and bold. And we can't see far objects as well. The colors appear lighter, duller, and pale. Now, not only does size change in space, so does the value, like we were just talking about. Objects in the background are not only smaller, but they are lighter. Objects in the middle ground are, of course, medium size, but their value is also medium. And objects in the foreground, that's the front, are the largest, of course, and look how dark. They are the darkest. Now, not only do the size of things and the value of things change in space, so does the placement. where you place the objects on the paper when you draw them. Objects in the foreground, that's the front, are lower on the paper, like this guy right here, down at the bottom. Objects in the background are higher on the paper, like those guys and those guys. See how high up above the foreground sheep they are? And objects in the middle ground, you guessed it, they're in the middle. They're in between the foreground objects and the background objects. They're in the middle. Now, before we get started drawing, let's gather up some supplies that we are going to need. Obviously, you're going to need a sheet of paper. Any paper will do. Some of you probably have a drawing book or a sketchbook of some kind. That would be perfect to use. Another thing that you can use is simply, this is what I'm going to use, a piece of printer paper out of the home printer. If you don't have any printer or printer paper that your parents will allow you to use, then dig around, be creative. This is a piece of mail that came in the mail. Perfectly good, clean on the back side. I could totally use that. More mail. We got lots of mail. This was printed on my family printer, but it was a mistake. Something about it was wrong. But clean on the back side, so you might dig around in the trash and see what you can find. And then this was some homework. Not my homework. This was my son's homework, but it's graded. He's done with it. He won't need it anymore. Backside, clean paper. So you might dig around in your backpack or some of your old school work that you brought home a long time ago and see if there's some backside of something that you can use. And then, of course, if you absolutely need to, you can also use a piece of lined notebook paper. It has the lines on there and it has the holes in the sides, but really, if that's what you have to use, that is perfectly okay as well. Now, the first part of this project is going to be drawing. So for a while, you'll only need a pencil and probably an eraser. Later, after all of our drawing is done, you're going to need something to trace with, of course, and you're going to need some coloring tools. But we'll talk about those when we get there. Right now, something to draw with, something to draw on, and probably an eraser. Go ahead, go get those things. I'll wait right here. Okay, so now that you're ready, you have to think about what you want to make a picture about. Basically, you are making an illustrated scene. A scene is like a snapshot of a larger story. So in my scene, the story here, obviously, is that this knight in shining armor has been called to duty by his kingdom to fight this ferocious dragon and keep the kingdom and all of the people in that castle back there safe. So he has come, he has brought his weapons, and he's wearing his protective gear, and he has come halfway to the dragon, and now he's standing there. And I have to think, what is he standing there for? Is he waiting for the dragon to come to him? Is he getting a little bit afraid? I don't know. But that's what artists do. They create snapshots, a little illustration, a little picture to help go with a story. Now, like I said, you're going to have three aspects to this picture. So you're going to actually be drawing at least three things. Something in the middle ground, something in the background, something in the foreground. And we're actually going to start in the middle ground. So whatever is going to be in the middle of your picture, that's what we need to think about first. So when I was deciding what to do here, I actually had no idea. So what I did, and this is what I encourage you to do, was I started looking at a how to draw website. And this is what I did when I created this. I just started scrolling around, because another thing that I want you to do on this is I want you to use guided drawings. So that means that you are going to find videos to follow along with. Each one of these things that I created, him, and that, I created by drawing along with a video. This one came from Art for Kids, I can never remember, Art for Kids Hub. But then I found this one somewhere else, and I found that one somewhere else. So you don't have to use Art for Kids Hub, but that's where we're going to start anyway. So here's the website. It's www.artforkidshub.com. And when you type that in, here's what happens. So when you get to artforkidshub.com and scroll down a little ways, and you recognize this because we've used this in class before, usually when I have a substitute, but these gray words right here are all of the things that this website shows you. We're going to focus on drawing, and so when you click on this, you get some categories and then also some subcategories. Ooh, mythical, that sounds fun. That's kind of what I did when I created my sample. And then of course, you can scroll down and you can find whatever it is that you want to make in your middle ground. Now, when you are searching through all of the choices they have for drawing, whether it's on this website or any website, there are some things you need to keep in mind. You are creating a scene with foreground, middle ground, and background. And so some of the options for drawing would not be appropriate or logical or make sense. So here is a rule for you. Whatever you choose to draw, whatever all three items are and how you tie them together, your picture needs to make sense. So for example, if I chose bacon and egg, that would not be an appropriate choice because when I look at this bacon and egg, I am looking straight down onto the plate. If I'm looking straight down onto a plate, that really doesn't give me any place for a background and a foreground. So bacon and egg, not a good choice. Here's another one, tiger head. That's an amazing tiger head. I would love it if someone drew that, but it's just a head. So not a totally appropriate choice unless you add a body, which you could totally do, or find a different picture of a tiger that has a body, because I can't think of any realistic illustrated scene that would have just a floating tiger head. Not one that's disturbing. But also, here's another, ice cream cone. Now this is pretty cartoony, and I am not saying that you cannot do something that is cartoonish, because that's definitely a style. However, you need to make sure that an ice cream cone with a face is going to make sense in the rest of the scene. Now, if you have a plan where you have a bunch of ice cream cones that come alive and create a scene, great. But if you're just sticking an ice cream cone randomly in a picture, that's probably not what we're going for. So be thoughtful as you scroll around and find an idea. Now remember, your first goal is to choose something that you're going to place in the middle ground. So pause this video, move over to the internet, plug in that website, scroll around, make your decision, and meet me right back here. All right, so I decided that I am going to do an Angelfish. Now, while I was scrolling through all of the choices, I was seeing all of the different things they had to offer, and it made me get a bunch of ideas. Some of them I knew probably wouldn't be inappropriate because it wouldn't look right in the picture, or I wouldn't be able to figure out what else to put with it to make it make sense. So always be thinking. But then I got to the fish page and I thought, that would be good, and I would like to do that, and I would like to do that, so I'm going to do an underwater scene. You are going to choose whatever you want. You should not copy exactly what I'm doing. You should make your own decisions. I'm just going to show you my process, what I think about, where I put things on the paper to make sure that it's effective. You are going to make your own decisions, and remember, every time you need to stop, draw for a while, catch up, press play, continue that way, because you know how this works. You're drawing your own thing. I'm just here to give you some guidance. You're making your own masterpiece. All right, so Angelfish, here we go. All right, I've got my video all queued up. I've got my paper ready. Before you begin, you need to decide if a vertical paper is going to be best for your design. That's how I did this one. Or if a horizontal paper is going to be best for your design. I know that since I'm doing an underwater scene, I'm going to have fish, and fish are more this shape than this shape. So I'm going with horizontal paper this time. You just need to think about which way is going to fit your choice of objects best. Once you have that figured out and your paper is oriented the correct way on your table, it's time to draw. Now, since we're starting with the middle ground object, we are going to start in the middle area of the paper, not at the top, not at the bottom, but in the central region. Notice on this guy, I pushed him over to the side because I knew that I was going to have something big here and I needed to have room in the background. If you put your main object right in the middle, you might run yourself out of space for whatever is going to be in your foreground and your background. So I recommend making your drawing on either side, in the center area of the paper, but maybe towards the right or maybe towards the left. I'm going to press play on my video and I'm going to draw my angelfish about right here on the right. Here I go, pressing play. Okay, so task number 1 accomplished. I have my middle ground fish. Now I have to decide now if I want to do my foreground next or my background next. It does not matter where you go from this point. You can go to the back of the paper and draw something small far away, or you can come to the front of the paper and draw something really big down in front. I have decided that I'm going to draw my foreground next, and I have chosen to draw a beluga whale. The problem with this beluga whale is that the way they're going to tell me to draw it is backwards from how I want it to fit on my paper. See, I want the whale's face to be facing the angelfish, so going this way, but I can tell from the picture that they're going to have me draw it backwards. Now, I can draw really good, but I can't draw things the opposite of the way someone is telling me to. My brain won't do that. So I'm going to draw this the way they show me on a different sheet of paper, just some scrap paper, maybe even this lined notebook paper. And then I'm going to show you how to do a trick to flip your picture and put it where you want it to be on your real paper. But before I do that, one thing that I'm going to need to do is I'm going to make sure that I am drawing it a good size, because this is how big my middle ground object is. And I know that my foreground has to be larger. Now, whales are larger anyway, right? So that's going to make sense. In fact, I'm not even going to be able to fit the entire whale in this picture because I'm going to make it so big. So especially if you're drawing on a different sheet of paper first, you have to keep in mind how large the drawing needs to be. It needs to be bigger than this, and then when I position it on here, or if you're drawing it directly onto your good paper already, it has to be, since I'm talking about foreground, it has to be in the lower area of the picture. Okay? Got my paper, my scrap paper, and I'm going to use my iPad for my video this time. Here I go, beluga whale. Wait, so I've gotten about halfway through this drawing, and already I can tell that it is not going to be big enough. Number one, whales are huge, and this whale is not turning out to be bigger than this fish. Not only because it's closer than this fish, but because whales are bigger than fish. So I have to stop, and I have to start over again. And I am here to tell you that sometimes that's what you need to do. If you know it's not going to work out, stop, get a new piece of paper, and start again. Do not be lazy and say, oh, well, and just go ahead and use it anyway. If it's not right, it's not right, and your picture won't make sense. And remember, one of our rules is your picture needs to make sense. All artwork doesn't make sense. But our assignment this time is to show foreground, middle ground, background to illustrate a scene, and that needs to make sense. So I'm going to start again, because sometimes that's what artists have to do. Beluga. Take two. Okay, so now this time you can see I got my whale plenty big. In fact, it wouldn't even fit all on the paper, so I didn't even have to draw the whole thing. But now my situation is I want this whale to be flipped over the other way. How am I going to do that? It's already drawn. Well, here is one of my most favorite art tricks ever. For this, you will need just your pencil. You'll need both of these pieces of paper, and you'll need a window. Okay, full confession here. While I'm recording this video, it's actually night outside, and so for me, going to a window won't work. Lucky though, I have this tool that I use in my stained glass work called a light box. A light box is just a box with light shining through it. And also, this will help me show you this trick a little and video myself a little bit easier. So we're going to pretend like my light box is a window because it's the same concept. The sunshine or the light or the daytime is outside your window. There's a piece of glass, the surface, and you're going to put your paper up to the glass. So here is my good page. This is the page I'm drawing everything on, and here is my whale that is going the wrong way. So I'm going to flip my whale over, and because of the light coming through the window, I can still see him. Then I'm going to take my paper, my good paper that has my middle ground object on there, and I'm going to put it over the top. And you can see I can move this paper and I can position that whale wherever I want him to be. So if I want him to be up high, I could move my paper there, except I don't want him up high because that is I'm saving for my background. I do want him down in the lower region though, because remember, foreground objects are in the lower area of the paper. So, and I want him to be nice and big. So I think I'm going to settle right there. Now I'm just going to hold my paper. If this was an actual window, I would be pressing them up against the window, holding them steady, and then I'm going to trace this whale onto this paper. Normally I would say no tracing allowed because that's cheating, except if what you're tracing is your own artwork to begin with, that's legit. That's legal. Trace away. And now, look what I have. I have a giant beluga whale facing his friend, the angelfish, and I have foreground, and it is so far down on the paper that if I use my imagination, the rest of the whale would be like down under the paper. So, foreground, middle ground, and I have one more thing that I have to include, and that is background. Now, I don't have very much space, but I do have this small area up here, so I'm going to have to choose something quite small. Wonder what it will be. Time to go back and surf a little bit more on the drawing video page and figure out what's going into my background. Well, bad news. The website that I was using, Art for Kids Hub, does not have what I want to draw. I got an idea that it would be cool to have jellyfish in my background, maybe like a school of jellyfish, but Art Hub for Kids doesn't have a jellyfish. So if you're like me, you might need to go looking somewhere else for your resource. You may go to YouTube and just type in the search bar how to draw jellyfish. If you add the words for kids, you get easier ones. Or you might have to go just do a Google search for how to draw whatever, and it might not be a video that it gives you, but it might be a guided drawing tutorial where you just look at the pictures and draw kind of like a drawing book. Either way is fine. You do not have to use videos to figure out how to draw something. Sometimes it is just by looking at pictures. So I'm going to go back to YouTube. use the video that I did find that shows me how to draw jellyfish and draw some jellyfish in my background. I'm going to draw them directly on this paper this time. You don't have to use the old switcheroo window technique every time. Sometimes you need it, sometimes you don't. I don't. Jellyfish, here I come. Now, before I get started, I have to remind myself of a couple of things. First of all, remember that the background is going to be placed higher up on the paper. So obviously I'm talking about this area back here. Another thing I have to remember is that the background objects are smallest. They are far away. That means that they look small compared to this large foreground, this medium-sized middle ground. So I'm going to fill in this area up here with jellyfish, in my case, that are small. I'm going to try to draw more than one, so it fills up this space. If I just have one random tiny jellyfish, that's not going to make much sense. So remember, one of our goals is to have a scene that makes sense. Here I go, pressing play. All right, so now I have foreground, middle ground, and background. But before I can say that I am done drawing, I am going to have to add some extras because really there is no details like in this extra empty space, pretty empty. I have done a good job of filling my paper, but I feel like I could just add some extra details. Things like bubbles coming out of their mouths, things like seaweed, things like that. So this is going to be different for every person. You're going to have to think about what your picture needs. In this picture, when I did it, I added the hillside. I added this line for ground. I also added this line, well, that line I had to have for the castle, but I added the path coming down. I added the chunks of grass. I went ahead and I added like the hillside or the mountains in the background. So something that's going to tie all three of your areas of ground together so that they're not just kind of floating around. Well, mine are literally floating around because they're underwater. But I think that I can add something to just tie it all together, just that little bit of extra detail. I think that I will add some bubbles coming from this fish. I think that I will add, I think that back here I'm going to add like a horizon line. This would be like an underground or an underwater horizon line. So perhaps this might be sand. Maybe in this area in the foreground, I'll have like a strip of seaweed. Well, probably would make more sense to have more than one strip of seaweed. These are going to be larger because they're in the foreground, right? Whereas if I have seaweed growing from back here, it's not going to be as large. It'll be a little bit more medium-sized because it is in the middle ground. Some seaweed back there. Maybe a strip of seaweed over here. That might even go off the page, okay? And then perhaps over here. There, now that feels a little bit more complete. I still have a little bit of emptiness up here. I think up here maybe I'll just add some texture lines showing maybe the current, how the water is flowing. If this was not an underwater scene, that could easily be clouds or something in the sky. All right, I'm done. Now let's talk about adding color. Now we are moving on to the second phase of the project, the outlining and the coloring phase. Now I'm going to give you some more precise instructions about coloring in a minute, but first let's talk about outlining. Because of course, everything that we've drawn in pencil now needs to be transformed into a darker line. If we were at school, I would totally give you a skinny Sharpie like this, and I would have you outline the whole thing with skinny Sharpie. If you have skinny Sharpie, awesome. But I'm guessing that probably most people don't have these at home. Now let's talk about some things you could use instead. If you have a set of skinny markers, coloring markers, kind of like this one, then get your black out and use that. My black is lost, so I'm holding up a green one, but you should use black if you have it. If you don't have anything like that, then you could totally use just a regular black ink pen. This is I don't even know what kind. It's just a pen I found in the drawer, but it's black. That would work. Something else that might work is a black colored pencil. If you have a set of colored pencils at home, maybe that you brought home last year, or just in some random craft supplies that you have, just press hard so that it becomes nice and bold and black. And if you don't have a colored pencil, then your normal pencil will do. You can use your normal pencil to just go over everything and make it a little bit bolder, a little bit thicker and darker. I don't care what you use, but everything in this picture now needs to be outlined. Remember, this project is not done until you've reached the end of the video. Sometimes people will get the drawing part done and then they'll forget, I guess, and take a picture and send it to me. I'm not going to put this on your Artsonia gallery until it is done. So trace, outline, whatever you want to call it, and then come back. Hey there. So I'm just finishing up the erasing that you know I would tell you to do after tracing. So after you have done all of your outlining with whatever tool you have decided to use, make sure that you go back and erase any of those pencil lines that are still showing. The only people who don't have to do that are the people who actually do their outlining with their normal pencil. Please don't erase all that hard work. Now we're going to talk about adding color. So in the very beginning of this video, we reviewed how value of objects change in the distance. Remember talking about particles. When you look into the distance, your eyes are actually looking through trillions of tiny dust particles or bugs or whatever. And so it makes things that are far away appear to be sort of faint or pale. Sometimes if there's a lot of particles, like on a foggy day, they're actually really hard to see. Things in the background are really hard to see. So what I'm going to recommend for this project is that you use different tools for coloring. If you have colored pencils, crayons, and markers, then I'm going to recommend that you use all three types of tools. That's what I did in this picture. So in the background, I used colored pencil because I know that colored pencil is smaller and it draws lighter. And so I wanted to put that in the area of my picture, which should be lighter, and that's the background, the things that are farthest away. Then I used crayon for the middle ground because crayon is bolder than colored pencil, but it's not as bold as marker, which is like the boldest of any art tool besides paint. The marker then I used for my foreground because I wanted it to be brighter and bolder, because things that are closer to you are generally brighter and bolder. So the bolder tool, marker, we'll use for the foreground, so those things can be really intense and bold. The medium tool, which is crayon, we'll use for the middle ground, because that area needs to be sort of a medium in value. And then our lightest tool, which is our colored pencil, we'll use for the background. If you have all three of those types of tools, I want you to find them. Don't be lazy and say, I'm too tired to walk upstairs and get my tools. Get them and use them. If you don't have all three of those types of tools, you probably at least have crayons, okay? So you could do the whole thing in crayon. You just need to press lighter or use lighter colors for the background, press medium for the middle ground, and press really bold and dark with the crayons for the things in the foreground. The same could be true for colored pencils if that's all you have. If marker is all you have, it's really hard to press lightly with marker. So if marker is the only thing that you have, then just do your best work coloring this in, okay? So I'm not going to make you watch me sit here and color this. I will show you when I get done though, but I want you to consider those things. Now that we know that artists use value, lightness, mediumness, and darkness to show space, I want you to think about that while you're coloring this in. Of course, I want you to do your very best coloring, inside the lines and all that business. And then remember, don't send me a picture until this is done. I'll be back in just a second to show you my finished project. Well, here it is, all finished. And like I just mentioned, I used my markers on my foreground object, crayons on the middle ground, and colored pencil in the background. Now take a close look. I want to talk to you about a couple of different things that you'll see here that I did. I did play around with some color overlapping, which is just a creative thing that you can do. For example, I overlapped some blue here over the top of the sand color because it's underwater and I wanted it to still look like it was underwater even though it was the color of sand. I also did some color blending and some overlapping. It turned out to look a little bit like shading over here on the fish and in the fin. And I did some shading up here on the jellyfish. Shading, of course, you can do by combining colors like I did right here. I have orange, which is darker, blending into a lighter orange, blending into a yellow. So I used 3 different colors overlapped to get that shading, or you can just do it with the same tool. Up here, I just colored the whole thing pink, and then I colored a little bit harder on one side to create that blending or that shading on the jellyfish up there. The only thing I struggled with was the marker, because as you probably already know, whenever you overlap your marker on top of itself, it creates a darker region, which I was getting a lot of that in my whale here. So I had to make it look like it was supposed to be that way. So I just made sure that my coloring kind of followed each other. So instead of just getting a bunch of random patchy dark and light areas that looked messy, now it looks kind of like markings on his skin or a texture in his hide. So in the background areas and the extras that I added, remember the seaweed. I did use my marker on the foreground to make those bigger and to make those brighter and bolder, and crayon in the middle ground. And then back here I used, I did use crayon back here in the far away background just because it was such a large area, but I chose a light color of blue for the water so that it would still be light in the background, even though it's with crayon and not colored pencil. So there you have it, some creative ideas, some ways that you can make this picture the best that it can possibly be. Now remember, when you get all finished with all of the coloring steps and it's complete, you are going to take a very good picture of this. Remember to hold it straight in the picture. Get your fingers back. Don't cover up your artwork with fingers. Get your fingers back and make sure there's not, sometimes when there's a bright light in the background, sometimes see how that's like taking a chunk out of the picture. Make sure that you are taking your picture without a big shiny light in the background. That's also helpful. All right, when you're all finished, email that to me, and I cannot wait to see what kind of creations that have foreground, middle ground, and background you guys are able to come up with. Have fun!